Okay, so where in the world are we going to be talking about? So for a long time, my research was confined to northeast India, and this is shown on the map here. It's the part in India that is shown in red on the map on the left-hand side. It's to the far right in India. When I talk to people about this in Australia, they often say, is that near Kashmir? Kashmir is the bit that the arrow is pointing to, and actually from northeast India to Kashmir, it is impossible to get there on the same day. I suppose it would be possible if you were Prime Minister or something, but even at the best of times, using commercial flights, you need at least 2 days to get there. So it's a very long way away from Kashmir. It is, on the other hand, very close to the border of Burma and China. And that border is a very mountainous one with some high snow-clad mountains. So what can we say about northeast India? Well, it's a linguistic hotspot with many different languages. It's got about 3% of India's population, but all the major religions are represented there. Although a majority of people in Assam, the biggest state, are Hindu, a majority of people in several of the other smaller states are in fact Christians, and some of them are overwhelmingly Christians. For example, Mizoram, on a Sunday evening, or even in Shillong, the capital of Meghalaya, it's very difficult to get food because everything is closed because it's Sunday. So of the total of 452 languages listed in India, and they're listed in an online source called the SIL Ethnologue, which used to be open for everyone to look at, you now have to pay, and languages which are accepted in there are also included in the International Standardization Organization's list of languages. That again is an area that would be worthwhile of a whole further study, but 452 languages are listed in India, 99 of them wholly or mostly in the northeast. So although it's got 3% of India's population, it's got a quarter of India's languages, and actually probably more because it's less well explored than the rest of the country. I should just mention, in terms of religion, you can see all the names that are mentioned there. It has been accepted by the religious authorities in Jerusalem that people living in some of the northeast Indian states are the lost tribes of Israel and have a right to return to Israel. So this is not a very well-known fact, and in fact, quite a lot of the Jewish people who left the Gaza Strip a few years ago, when the Gaza Strip was abandoned by Jewish settlers, were in fact people who had been born in northeast India. It is an area of considerable linguistic diversity in terms of language families. So language families, the Austroasiatic family, the most best known language of which is Khmer. Dravidian languages, the best known language there would probably be Tamil. Indo-European, of which English and the North Indian languages belong, and also French and German and whatever. Tai-Kadai language family, the best known language of which is Thai, and Tibeto-Burman, well, Tibetan and Burmese are part of that. So languages which are related to those are all found in this area. This represents the greatest diversity within India in terms of different types of languages. Okay, and however, most of these languages have been brought by known waves of migration. I won't go through all of these periods, but over the last 2,000 years or so, the Dravidians, the Tai-Kadai, the Tibeto-Burmans, and the Indo-Europeans have come into this area from different directions and for different reasons. The Austroasiatic speakers, these are languages that are related to Khmer, of the Khassian group, Khassi being the main language in Shillong, in Meghalaya, these have the longest presence in the northeast. But migration, which is a very important part of human history and a very natural part of the way that humans work, is one of the things that has brought this about most particularly. Now, this is a map from Wikipedia of the spread of Thai languages. And this would be a whole lecture in its own right, and the linguistic subject languages in Asia, we would cover this topic. But what you can see here is that within the Thai Kadai family, most of the diversity is now actually in what is now China. Those different colours represent different branches of the Thai Kadai family. And almost all of those branches are only represented in China. But the biggest one, southwestern Thai, that orange colour, is spread over a much larger area and has much less diversity than the remaining families. And that spread finds its way all the way up into northeast India. That's that far top left-hand corner portion of it. And those are the languages I have researched. And one of those is Thai Ahom. This is how it's written in English, and above at the top, how it's written in the Ahom script. So the Ahom kingdom was founded traditionally in the year 1228 by people who migrated from the bottom right-hand side of this map across those mountains that represent the border of India and Myanmar, Burma, into the plains of Assam, which is that green area, and eventually conquered it. And that kingdom continued until British times. The traditional first king, Sirkapa, 1228 to 1268, this is one of the modern drawings of him. There are no contemporary drawings of him, but the first part of his name, Su, means tiger. Literally probably the tiger that went to heaven, or that goes to heaven, or that is equal to heaven, or something like that. According to the Ahom Chronicles, which are called Burangi, there were 38 kings in a single dynasty, but the first king for whom there are contemporary documents or inscriptions is Sehumung, who started his reign in 1497, and he also had Thai and Hindu names. In his time, a great Hindu sage called Sankadev came up in northeast India, and this led to a huge spreading of Hinduism throughout this kingdom. This is a picture of the royal palace of the Thai Ahoms at Gorgaon. It used to be 7 stories in size, 1 more above and 2 more below the ground, but the British destroyed some of it because rebels held out in it. It was built probably to begin with in the 17th century. The population of the Ahoms has varied. It has grown over time, but it is a large portion of the people in the upper districts of Assam. But the language is no longer spoken as a mother tongue. Why might this be? So remember, these were the ruling people. These are the people who were in charge of the polity in that place. Why did they stop speaking their own language? Well, part of the reasons, the linguist's explanation of this would be an overwhelmingly non-Thai speaking population in the kingdom, particularly after 1500, after the time of Sehumung, the king who expanded the kingdom. Secondly, intermarriage with non-Thai people from the earliest times. So it was mostly men, and mostly young men, who came across the mountains to set up their new kingdom on the other side of the mountains in the Brahmaputra Valley. And the one thing that mostly young men always do is to intermarry with the local girls. This is just what happens everywhere all the time. So from the beginning of the Thai Ahom kingdom, even though the elite, the kings and the priests were Thai speaking, from the beginning they were marrying people speaking other languages. And it might be that it's harder for people speaking those other languages to learn Thai. It is certainly very difficult in the current era for Thai Ahom people to learn Thai language, partly because of the presence of tones. We heard about them before. So it may be that. Another reason is the conversion to Vaishnavite Hinduism. I mentioned Sankadev before. who lived at the same time as Sahumung. So at the same time as the kingdom expands to include more people with different speaking populations, you also have a huge renaissance of Hinduism in northeast India. There's been comparatively little language mixing between Assamese and the Thai language. One word which comes to mind is laupani, which is the word for kind of general, well, I guess, rice wine, or and it comes from a traditional Thai word lau, meaning liquor, and the Indian word pani, meaning water. This is an everyday word in Assamese, but it's one of very few. Another possible reason for the change is the costly traditional rituals that the Thai Ahom traditional religion demanded. Very significant payments to priests for doing their thing. And all across the world, very costly traditional religions are being and have been for many, many years replaced because of the cost, because it is difficult to provide large numbers of cattle and pigs and bags of rice and silver and gold and so on that are required. Okay, now the blog that you have been pointed to, I will now mention briefly what Selma Sontag spoke about. So, and we had a brief dialogue some little earlier about these things. So she had written a book, she'd written a chapter in a book which is entitled What Happened to the Ahom Language, The Politics of Language Contact in Assam. And she explained the shift, as she says here, in political terms, arguing that the state traditions of the Ahom kingdom were transforming from a non-territorial concept of the state to a territorial one, and a rigid, steep socio-political hierarchy of the kingdom's nobility was flattening out. Now, it is certainly true that in the traditional Thai society there was a definite hierarchy. At the top, the king, then there were various ministerial officials, and all of these different titles are preserved today in amongst the Ahom community. So there are Borgohains and Bopatragohains, and there are Hazarikas and Soikias and Gogois and Pukons and Mohans, and all of these different groups have different roles in the society, and their names are either partly Thai names or they are loan translations of Thai names. And the kind of society that was gradually replacing that did not have that kind of hierarchy, perhaps different kinds. So there's a different explanation for the politics. And then this is the explanation to the exchange that I had with Selma during this period, a year or so ago. And one of the things that I said is I have tried as a linguist to steer completely clear of politics, that is local, present-day politics. But in fact, language and linguistics is an inherently, well, the statements that we make as scholars have a politically important aspect. So when I, for example, make the statement that the Thai Ahom language is no longer spoken as a mother tongue, this is, in my view, undoubtedly true, and I've never found any evidence to the contrary. But it is also a strong political statement in a country like India, where tribal status and some of the benefits that that brings, at least to some of the members of the tribes, is reliant on having a separate language. So the Thai Ahoms do not have scheduled tribal status, and in part that's because their language is not spoken by them. So when a linguist like me says the language is not spoken as a mother tongue, that has a political effect. Now, I see no reason from a scholarly point of view not to keep saying that, because it's true. However, you need to be aware, I need to be aware when I make statements, what the effect of those statements are. One of the things that's going on with Ahom is a language revival. And some of the stuff that Selma writes at the bottom of her blog there, comments about phonology and script, which I'm still pondering without fully comprehending. One of the issues here is that understanding of language and linguistics is an important part of dealing with issues like language revitalization. So and here we're talking about the revitalization of a language that ceased to be spoken 200 years ago or more. So how can you rebuild that based on large numbers of 18th and 17th century manuscripts if we don't do the study of those manuscripts and understand what they are telling us? In particular, Thai languages, all of them, are tonal languages. But how do we recreate tones if we are going to revitalize this language? So these are issues. So what survives of Ahom today? Well, manuscripts. I've mentioned those, and I had a project a few years ago to photograph manuscripts. You'll see some photos shortly. Those manuscripts come in different forms. There are the histories, there are the astrologies and predictions, and there are also spirit calling texts. So a tradition of the Thai people is that if there's something not going right in the world, you need to practice a spirit calling ceremony. Perhaps quite needed right now. And the idea is that the spirit, Quan or Quan, sometimes also called Ming, of whatever it is that is not functioning, whether it's the paddy field harvest, whether it's an individual person, whether it's the whole polity, the spirit has gone away and needs to be called back. And these spirits, and I have attended these ceremonies amongst the people who are speakers of related Thai languages living in northeast India today, they have books. We saw actually an example of a manuscript earlier, which was such a book, which get read in a formal sense at the time when the spirit is called. And the spirit is also offered sweet foods, good foods, spirits like that. And then they come back and they either re-inhabit the body of the sick person or they revitalize the harvest for the next year. So they're spirit calling texts. Some of the religious observance of the Thai Ahoms is still going on, in particular the honouring or worship, if you like, of the ancestors. And on the 31st of January every year they perform a ceremony called Medamethi, which is to honour the ancestors, and I attended that in Dibrugarh this year on January 31st. I was lucky enough to have just a small window of opportunity for a safe field trip to northeast India between the various demonstrations and lockdowns from the Citizenship Act in December and the current situation. It was just that small window in January. This is what the Ahom alphabet looks like. This has now been accepted in Unicode, but this is not a Unicode font because I prefer this font and I haven't been able to Unicode it yet. And this is an example of a traditional Ahom manuscript, Ming Mung Lung Pai, and this is one of the spirit calling texts. You can't see that very clearly, so I've blown it up in the next slide where you can see it a little bit more. Top left-hand corner, there is a sort of symbol, which is it actually means a sort of paragraph beginning type symbol. This is a particularly ornate version of it. And then the first few words, Pong Lung Dong Pong Mok. Now what we're going to hear next is the intonation of this text by one of the community members, Jyotilesha Mohan. It is a very Indian-inspired version of the text, but he is reading this with an initial 3 times of this Jau Nuru, Jau Kawai. You'll hear it.
Jau Nuru, Jau Kawai. Chanuro Chauka Chanuro Chauka Trong mưa trong bạc mặc mưa rau tem dẻo con môi hình như tem ăn ọc.
Okay, so that was performed by Jaltilesha Mohan, who is the owner of the... Sorry. Right. So this manuscript we translated, spending, it's 9 pages. We spent a week working on it in 2007 and then a second period of several days in 2008 revising it. I put together a team which included myself with sort of general expert knowledge of Thai languages, Chai Chun Kamdengyo Thai, who is a speaker of Shan, which is a related language and an expert in Thai literature. He was but he came from Thailand to do this. He was the person with the knowledge of vocabulary, also the way that Thai literature works, also the way that sort of sentences can be put together. But we also had local people, including the owner of the manuscript and several of the younger members of the priestly community with their kind of local cultural knowledge, and students from the Gauhati University Linguistics Department who had done some of the data entry. And together we came up with a translation. But one of the issues that we had is that although the spoken language would have had between 3 and 6 different tones, these are not written, and so the same form can have multiple meanings. And here, for example, is the syllable gong. Now this could have had different tones. It could have been gong, 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 even gong, but it is all written the same. And you can see all the different meanings that it has and how those meanings are mostly unrelated to each other. This could also theoretically be pronounced as guang. So this is an example where the script underspecifies pronunciations not only of tones. Anybody who knows the word in Thai language will recognize the connection with the word for wide here, but it can mean hill, echo, gun, oversunned paddy, drum, courtyard, jaw, and Indian aconite. And these are all unrelated terms. These are not like the English word bear. Well, they're a bit like the English word bear. So B-E-A-R meaning the animal versus B-E-A-R meaning to carry or tolerate. But carry or tolerate are different words now, but they have related meanings. But these are all completely different and separate meanings. And then there is a word heap, which can be used both as a noun and a verb, and then it can be control, prune, prepare for husking, hide, spin, anticipate, etc. All these meanings have been collected. So if you have 2 words together and each of those words has 17 meanings, then there are 17 squared possible combinations of meanings. Most of them will be nonsense, but at least it's likely that more than one of them will be. So somebody like Chai Chun is a real expert in doing this. In this photo, we see Chai Chun on the right-hand side. So he's come from Thailand with expertise not in this language and its direct culture, but more generally in Thai skills. And then Medini Mohan sitting in the middle, who is one of the younger sort of members of the priestly caste and a great supporter of language revival and one of my best Facebook friends, and I spent a night in his house at the beginning of February. And Zinat Tabassum, a student from Gauhati University, doing the data entry. And you can see bits of manuscript. They're made on bark. You can see all the pages of the manuscript spread out on the table. And here we have our team cleaning manuscripts in preparation for photographing them, cleaning off bits of insects and other dirt that would also make the manuscripts less likely to survive. But you can also see down the bottom here how some of the manuscripts have already been damaged. And an essential part of any visit to Northeast India, right down in the bottom right-hand corner, cups of tea. But cups of tea were brought out on this occasion before we were ready. We didn't want to drink tea while cleaning manuscripts, and then we had to put them in the right order. And here's an interesting thing. So this particular bit of text from the spirit calling text tells where the spirit might have gone from which it has to be called back. So our first translation, Menru Ri Nangru Ba, was it's sitting on the shoulder of the long-headed Naga. So Naga, we're going to be talking about Naga people in a minute. Naga meaning hill tribe people, hill people. The Tayahoms are plains people, so the hill people. And that's what men, that word men means a Naga. So if this would literally be sit on, so of the long-headed Naga, sit on his head. But I remember one morning very early, Ajahn Chaichurn, although 10 years older than me, was in the habit of getting up very early and starting work very early. And one morning he got up very early, had his bath at 5:30 when it's still very cold in winter up there. But he said it's better to have a cold bath when it's cold. The difference between the air temperature and the water is less and you feel good. I never took this advice, but anyway. He came to me and he said, I don't think our translation of that line is right. I think it should be this. Naga head long like head horse. Literally, it is with the long-headed Nagas whose heads are like horses. Actually, his first suggestion was whose heads are like dogs, because the word for horse and dog is the same, is written the same, would be pronounced differently. So, for example, in Taipake, the word for dog is pronounced ma, and the word for horse is ma, but they are written the same. And so the translation, as you can see, depends on certain words being interpreted in different ways. We can't be sure which of these translations is correct. They are both plausible grammatically and in terms of the words. We just think it's more likely that the second one is right. And the idea here is that the spirit has gone up into the mountains with the Naga people. How shall we describe the Naga people in these poetic terms? We'll describe them as having long heads. And one of the reasons for that is that they tend to wear these very tall, kind of, especially the men, these very tall helmets. I haven't got a photo of those, or maybe I have later. And maybe that's what they were thinking of. Okay, the traditional Ahom religion. This is the belief in the importance and ubiquitous nature of spirits, Kwan, both good and bad. Placating the spirits is done by offering them costly items, and the practice of calling spirits is done. Now, the Rik Kwan Mung, which is the spirit calling that is required if the country is sick, was performed on the 2nd of July 2012 using the translation that we had made that I was talking to you about. But Turwil, who made Bas Turwil, Barent Jan Turwil, a professor formerly from the ANU, originally from the Netherlands, later in Germany, he has called this pseudo-old Ahom ritual. So he has questioned whether any of this should be regarded as having any kind of authenticity. As he points out, the anthropologist is able to demonstrate that the Ahom cannot read their ancient manuscripts. This is largely true. He can further show that the rituals there described have nothing in common with the constructs of after the 1960s. To him, the claims of historical continuity are simply untrue. Now, these statements, if they apply to the Ahoms, can be applied in other parts of the world, can be applied in southern and eastern Australia, can be applied to the Cornish to the west of England. And I am a bard of the Cornish Gorsedd, and we had a bardic ceremony in Ballarat 3 weeks ago, and this could be applied exactly to those things too. But what does this mean? What does this imply? So I think what it implies is that because there is a lack of continuity of tradition, of language and culture, or an interruption in that continuity and a recreation, a reinvention, a reorganization of traditions after this interruption, that this is somehow not anthropologically sound. This view can be questioned and discussed. Okay, the ceremony of Medamepi, the worship of the traditional spirits, was performed in the year 2010 at the Gorgaon Palace. I showed you a photograph of that before, and it was led by Jautilesha Mohan, who is the person who owns that manuscript and whose singing voice you heard before, and he invited me to sit next to him as the chief honoured guest while they performed the ceremony, which did involve the sacrifice of a number of chickens, which were beaten with bamboo rods. I'm not going to show you that bit of video, but here are the chickens post-sacrifice with the various small altars to the different spirits on the left-hand side and the chickens that are being offered on the right. The Ahom language revival, the key stages in this: the 18th century, the language ceases to be spoken as a mother tongue, and people worry about this. And the key stages in the revival are firstly the production of the Boromra. So this is a dictionary from Ahom to Assamese, the language that people are switching to, written in the Ahom script, done in about 1795. And then Brown, who was, I think, an American actually, I just currently haven't got my information about him in my head, who went and met with some of the priests to find out what they knew and published the first attempt to translate one of these manuscripts into English. Borua in 1920 created a dictionary taking information from the Boromra but also from other sources, and we don't know fully what they were, a memorandum declaring the Ahom community to be different from the rest of India in 1968, and the formation of the Ban or Public Mungtai, which is a sort of literary association, in 1981. So the history of language revival and interest in reviving it amongst that community is continuous every minute since the language ceased to be spoken. Terwill, in his 1996, argues that the modern language is a pseudo-Ahom language, and here's an example of it, published in 1990.